1,000 Things About 1,000 Brains. Review of Jeff Hawkins' 1,000 Brain book. As someone who has been doing computational cognitive neuroscience for 10 years before Jeff graduated from college, I have 1,000 things to say but do not have the time for the 2 or 3 books to set a ship right. But like all good ships, it is fundamentally a good ship. It is ignorant of a lot that we do know, and I fear people will think some of his hubris, the foul settings of his sails, will be missed by many of his readers. 1,000 Brains, A New Theory of Intelligence. Amazon.com. 1,000 Brains, A New Theory of Intelligence Audible Audio Edition. Jeff Hawkins, Richard Dawkins. www.amazon.com. His first book also had a dash too much hubris. On Intelligence made insane claims that he had solved how the neocortex worked. On Intelligence. Amazon.com. On Intelligence Audible Audio Edition. Jeff Hawkins, Stefan Rudnicki, Jeff Hawkins, Sandra Blakesley. www.amazon.com. Many experts, myself included, bounced off his book's contributions because we all knew he was lying. He did not have a clue how intelligence actually worked, just some glimmers of knowledge, but I came to appreciate his book with the Audible version. This way I did not quit reading as I did when I encountered his hubris, when my eyes fixed on his outrageous lines of text. I had once before used this Audible trick to get through a book. It was Darwin's Origin of the Species, which I had tried to read about 3 times in my life, and failed, until I listened to it read in a deep British accent. I realized it had to be read in a British accent to be appreciated for its deserved greatness. On the Origin of Species. Amazon.com. On the Origin of Species Audible Audio Edition. Charles Darwin, Peter Wickham, Naxos Audiobooks Audible. www.amazon.com. Jeff refers to Darwin's work with the same respect I now have. I also believe everyone should be required to listen to Darwin's Origin book as a part of their education, because frankly, it is such an amazing and convincing feat of the scientific art of careful observation. The Origin book so perfectly described DNA in a time when even atoms, let alone molecules, were unknown. Also unknown was the meaning of information, let alone bits of information and entropy which make DNA. This is what Jeff is doing, but he needs to set his sails a little better. Jeff's 1,000 Brains now admits he really doesn't know how the neocortex computes. He reminds the reader that his ideas are just like Darwin's, ideas resulting from his careful observations. He admits with his 1,000 Brains theory he still does not actually know how the cognitive brain computes, but the hubris is still lurking in his dismissal of many other scientific, scholarly efforts that are complementary and informative in essential ways. All this said, Jeff's book should be deeply applauded for the discourse that it is. Unfortunately for this reviewer, there are just too many observations that he has not yet assimilated to be listed in a few words. Instead, here is my brief attempt to tie what I think he was talking about in terms of my own theoretical excursion into computational cognitive neuroscience over the last 50 years, starting a dozen years before he started. His idea of neocortical computation on intelligence as a memory prediction engine is what, in the 1970s, we studied as the organization of human memory. I was Lisp coding and testing memory prediction engines against human experimental data before he graduated. From college in my work on action perception, 1977-9. In both books, he suggests that Vernon Mountcastle was the first in 1978 to suggest that there was a universal cortical algorithm. Yet, I believe that was Donald Hebb back in 1949. I was an early convert back in 1969 while still in college and designed, and did, human experimentation on intermodal visual verbal memory, which I published in 1973. Jeff also ignores plain facts dating back over a century, that universal computation was not only suspected, but discovered by Turing and others. They were proven right by the existence of and success of computers in every facet of our life today. Jeff even relates this in 1,000 Brains without noticing that is an example of a scientific glimmer of neocortical universal computation. Now about lies. For the last 3 years, I have been studying the computational cognitive neuroscience of lies. As with all my previous studies, I am after that universal neocortical algorithm that we so imperfectly understand, even today. However, the evidence that one or more of them exists continues to be compelling. This study of lies has turned out to be highly productive, insofar as it provides additional glimmers on universal neocortical computation. Jeff has some conversation on lies in his book, but his ideas are from what I would call a standard naive view of lies. For example, he talks about untruths and falsehoods, but many untruths are actually deceitful truths. For example, lies do not have to be factually untrue if the deceit is in the motivation for telling truths. We see a lot of this kind of lying with dictators. Dictator lies. First, get elected, then. Medium.com. This study of lying provides a good way anybody can understand how Jeff said his sales wrong in his book. I will take two of the most significant examples, although there is easily 1,000 lurking in his text. These two examples would, I think, correct most of his 1,000 errors of hubris. So the reader will recognize, despite his hubris, what a fine contribution his book and research has made to the study of computational cognitive neuroscience. Wrong. The new brain is evil, not nice and logical. The old brain may be evil like a reptile, but the new brain, the neocortex, is far more evil and illogically dangerous than the old brain. Jeff pretty nearly outright says that neocortical computation is logical and is not the source of lies. It is the more primitive reptilian brains. This is outrageously wrong. Indeed, our scientific understanding of this goes back 400 years. Here is a short article on how the human brain knows truth and lies and how, in the Age of Enlightenment, humankind perfected the control over disinformation, misinformation, and conspiracy theories. Fiat lies are genocide on the human race, the Internet Court of Lies. Medium.com. A basic tenet of this work is that human natural language is a direct window on the computation done by the neocortex. It is this because uniquely human natural language evolved expressly as a direct means to communicate neocortex to neocortex. What we see in a sentence from the neocortex generating it, and from the neocortex understanding it, tells us what our computational model of the universal cortical algorithm has to explain. But any animal with a neocortex can lie creatively. Human lies, though, can include what the neocortex can view of how the neocortex computes. People can show empathy and deep malice because these come from the inherent intelligence of their neocortex as observed in how people have evolved their natural language. Dictators do not lie for reptilian reasons. They lie for cognitive reasons. As I say in the following article, you can no more take lies out of the human neocortex than you can take water out of water. Whether the lies are good or evil, the neocortex quite naturally and inevitably conjures them up. Don't vote for liars. The Mendasiology of Power. Medium.com. And as I say about fiat lies, these pose an existential threat to mankind that mankind has recognized clearly since the beginnings of the Age of Enlightenment. Liberty is not a reptilian urge. It is a cognitive one, if what we mean by liberty is liberty under law where lies can be neocortically dug out from their neocortical logic. In another article written before I read Hawkins, the uniquely human natural language motor in the human neocortex has the opposite of constraining the evil of neocortical evil genius, the one and only motor of the evil machine, your natural language motor. The one and only evil machine, Medium.com. Jeff, is greed for money reptilian evil, or is it neocortical evil? Which reptiles get disturbed by money? Indeed, which other mammals aside from humans get disturbed by money? This isn't that other mammalian neocortices cannot understand money, but that they cannot communicate their lies about it to others of their species. Wrong. Frames of reference can be studied with vastly better depth using existing knowledge which Hawkins slights. His concept of frames of reference is not a new concept at all, simply because wet neuroscientists have never thought of it. Indeed, it is the overwhelming mainline observation in various branches of dry computational cognitive neuroscience. Rather than criticize him for his discovery, we can see what the dry neuroscience can add to the very nice exposition of what the wet neuroscience has discovered. There is much, much more that we know about frames of reference. What we know relates directly, I believe, to how cortical columns operate and how they are connected or wired neuronally together and with the more reptilian brains in our brains. People like me who have been studying human memory, including verbal and nonverbal memory in all sensory modalities, have given a lot of respect to natural language as a window on the neocortex. If I put your idea of frame of reference into my more traditional terms, going back over 100 years, I get subjects and topics of discussion. I believe the neocortical computations are always strongly bias-based on statistical experience, but those biases are just that, biases, not absolutes. Some examples of truths that anyone who knows any natural language can see. Any sentence can be a lie. and any sentence can be a truth. It depends on the predication context in which that sentence is put. Any noun can be a verb, and any verb can be a noun. It also depends on the predication context. Depends means depends. Means means means. QED. Any subject can be a predicate, and a predicate can be a subject. The organization of predications in a sentence or story are hierarchical, but these hierarchies are ephemeral for the purpose of communication. Saying, writing, or otherwise signaling a sentence is an act of serializing neocortical knowledge, just like throwing a ball is an act of serializing neocortical knowledge. Understanding a sentence, whether heard, read, or otherwise perceived, is an act of deserializing neocortical knowledge to the appropriate topics, that is, frames of reference. The new information, old information, in a sentence is a big part of signaling neocortex to neocortex, how various frames of reference combine. Knowledge is built statistically, but not by truth. If I were to take your grid and place levels, I would say no. These are just an illustration of many frames reference which you can find directly in what people can say not only about the world outside their body, but the world inside their mind. There is much more detail on the neuroscience of this in my book on lies published back in 2019. Amazon.com. Jeff needs to find people who do deep dives, not shallow, unmotivated dives, on how the neocortex must compute in order to compute. Up natural language understanding and production based on systems of relatively simple discrimination classification networks. And yes, Jeff, this is AI, natural language processing, and machine learning, whether you like it or not. I was hoping you would realize in your book that predications are fundamental. Instead, you decided that nouns were. Frames of reference are not meaningful. They are not true or false, unless one frame of reference interacts predicatively, in an ephemeral way on another. Similarly, I was hoping you would show recognition that 99% plus verbs in any human language signal agency, neocortical intent, but instead just think our brains work with movement, not causal action. But imputing cause is fundamental to neocortical computation if we look at natural language. We do believe a cortical column is arranged to take input from perceptions and compute action. Cognitively, this does not just lead to that, it causes that, if only by imputing. That surprising movements or conveyed ideas may be intentional. Neocortically, a sentence may become a suspected lie. I do not think it occurred to Jeff that every cortical column can lie and can be deceived. Every one of those 1,000 brains is a liar, and not just a truth teller. And, with natural language, anybody can push those buttons in the 1,000 brains of another person. It just depends. That said, since we know each other, I hope you will still talk to me. I've lost good friends when I started studying human lying, even though I was doing it purely for neocortical scientific goodness and without any reptilian interest in the subject at all.